August 17, 1943, Schweinfurt, Germany. A formation of 376 B-17 Flying Fortress bombers is inbound. Target: ball-bearing factories, critical to German war production, and every available Luftwaffe fighter is scrambling. Among them, Oberfeldwebel Heinrich Müller, 23 years old, from Hamburg. This is his 237th mission. 237. He's exhausted. Hasn't had leave in 4 months. Flies every day, sometimes twice. His hands shake. He has nightmares. Can't sleep, can't eat, but he flies. Because that's what you do. You fly until you can't anymore. Until you die. Or until the war ends. Whichever comes first. Müller climbs toward the American formation. Spots a straggling B-17. Engine smoking, falling behind. He attacks. Closes to 200 yards. Fires. Misses. His hands are shaking too much. He tries again. Closes. Fires. The B-17's waist gunner fires back. 50 caliber tracers. Müller's aircraft is hit. Canopy shatters. He's wounded. Shoulder. Bleeding. But he presses the attack. Has to. One more pass. He fires. The B-17's wing erupts. Fuel fire. The bomber spirals down. Müller breaks off. Heads for base. Crash lands. Survives. Gets patched up at the field hospital. And 3 days later, he's flying again. Mission 238. Because in the Luftwaffe, you fly until death. That's the policy. That's the reality. And Heinrich Müller will fly 63 more missions before a P-51 Mustang shoots him down over Berlin in March 1944. He doesn't survive that one. Now, let me tell you about Lieutenant Robert Johnson, United States Army Air Forces. Same day, August 17th, 1943. Johnson is flying escort, P-47 Thunderbolt, protecting those same bombers heading to Schweinfurt. And Johnson, he's on his 23rd mission. 23. 2 more, and he goes home. That's the rule, the policy. 25 missions and you rotate back to the States. You're done. You train new pilots, you rest, you recover. And if you want, you can volunteer for another tour. But you don't have to. 25 and out. That's the deal. And Johnson is counting. 23. 2 more. Just 2 more. He's going to make it. He's going to go home, see his family, his girlfriend, marry her, live. That's the difference. When you know there's an end, you have hope. You have something to fight for beyond the next mission. You fight to survive 25. Not forever, just 25. Here's the thing. Robert Johnson does survive, completes his 25th mission, goes home, marries his girlfriend, trains new pilots, lives until 2006, age 83, natural causes, dies in his sleep, surrounded by family. Heinrich Müller, he dies at 23, in a burning fighter, over Berlin. No family, no future. Just another name on a casualty list. 2 pilots, same war, same time, different systems, different philosophies, and very different outcomes. Let me tell you about the numbers, because numbers tell the story. The United States Army Air Forces, over the course of World War II, trained approximately 210,000 pilots. 210,000. Of those, roughly 65,000 deployed to combat theatres. 65,000. And of those 65,000, approximately 15,000 died in combat. 15,000. That's a 23% casualty rate. High, terrible, but not catastrophic. Because America had a system, a rotation system. Pilots served a tour, 25 missions for bomber crews, 50 missions for fighter pilots, and then they went home. Most of them. Not all, but most. Now Germany. The Luftwaffe trained approximately 125,000 pilots during the war. Smaller number. Germany had less resources, less fuel, less everything. Of those 125,000, roughly 100,000 saw combat, and of those 100,000, approximately 85,000 died. 85,000. That's an 85% casualty rate. 85%. Let that sink in. If you became a Luftwaffe pilot and saw combat, you had an 85% chance of dying. Not getting wounded, dying. That's not a military force. That's a death sentence with wings. So the question becomes, why? Why did Germany accept an 85% casualty rate? Why didn't they implement a rotation system like the Americans? And the answer is complicated. Part doctrine, part resources, part philosophy, and part desperation. Let's break it down. First, doctrine. German military doctrine, going back to the Prussian era, emphasized duty above all. Your duty is to serve, to fight, until victory or death. There's no concept of, you've done enough. There's no rotation, no reward for survival. You serve until the war is won, or until you die. That's it. And this doctrine, it worked in short wars. The Franco-Prussian War lasted less than a year. World War I, it didn't work. Germany lost, millions died, but the doctrine survived. And in World War II, it's still there. You fight until death. That's your duty. Second, resources. Germany, by 1943, is running out of pilots. Training new pilots takes time, months, and fuel. Lots of fuel. And Germany doesn't have fuel, so they can't train replacements fast enough, which means the experienced pilots have to keep flying, because if they stop, there's no one to replace them. It's a vicious cycle. Pilots die. Replacements aren't ready. Experienced pilots fly more missions, get more exhausted, die faster. The cycle accelerates. And by 1944, the Luftwaffe is hemorrhaging pilots faster than they can train them. Third, philosophy. And this is the dark part. German leadership, specifically Hitler and Goering, didn't value individual lives. They valued results. They didn't care if a pilot flew 200 missions and was exhausted. They cared if he shot down enemy aircraft. And if he died, well, that's war. Someone else will take his place. Eventually. This philosophy, it's fundamentally different from the American approach. America valued pilots, treated them as assets, expensive assets. Training a pilot cost roughly $50,000 in 1943 dollars. That's almost $1 million today. You don't throw away $1 million asset after 25 missions if he's still capable of fighting. But you also don't work him to death. You rotate him, let him rest, recover. And if he volunteers to come back, great. If not, you've preserved his experience for training. Germany didn't see it that way. They saw pilots as expendable. And that difference, that fundamental difference in how they valued human life, that's what determined the outcome of the air war. Let me tell you about the 25-mission rule, where it came from. Early 1943, the 8th Air Force, based in England, is flying daylight bombing raids over Germany. And the losses are catastrophic. Some missions, 10% of aircraft don't return. 10%. That means, statistically, if you fly 10 missions, you're probably dead. And morale is terrible. Crews are terrified. Some refuse to fly. Some have breakdowns. And the commanders realize, we have a problem. If crews think they're going to die, they will. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Fear causes mistakes. Mistakes cause deaths. So the 8th Air Force implements a policy. 25 missions and you go home. Survive 25 and you're done. You've earned it. And suddenly, morale improves. Because now there's hope. There's a finish line. It's not endless. It's not until death. It's 25. And you can count. 24 left, 23, 22. Each mission is progress. Progress toward survival, toward going home. And it works. Crew performance improves. They're more focused, more disciplined, because they're not just surviving the next mission, they're surviving to reach 25. And statistically, it's possible. The average loss rate per mission is around 5%, high. But that means 95% survive. Fly 25 missions at 5% loss rate per mission, and your odds of surviving all 25 are roughly 30%. Not great, but not zero. You have a chance. And that chance, that hope, it keeps people going. Now let me tell you about the reality. Because 25 missions sounds manageable. But it wasn't. Let me walk you through what a bomber crew endured. You wake up at 3 in the morning. Briefing at 4. You learn your target. Schweinfurt, Berlin, Regensburg, deep into Germany. You eat breakfast. Can't keep it down. Too nervous. You gear up. Heated flight suit. Oxygen mask. Parachute. Flak vest. May West life jacket. 50 pounds of equipment. You climb into the bomber. B-17. 10-man crew. You're the waist gunner. Middle of the aircraft. 250 caliber machine guns. Your job? Shoot down German fighters attacking from the side. You take off. Form up with 300 other bombers. It takes an hour. Then you head east, toward Germany, toward the target. You're at 25,000 feet. Altitude, it's minus 40 degrees, minus 40. Even with the heated suit, you're freezing. Your hands are numb. Your face is numb. You're breathing pure oxygen through a mask. And you're in the aircraft for 8 hours, sometimes more. And for 6 of those hours, you're over enemy territory. And the Germans are trying to kill you every second. Flak, anti-aircraft fire, exploding all around you. You hear the metal fragments hitting your aircraft. Ping, ping, ping. You see bombers nearby getting hit, exploding, falling. Parachutes. Sometimes, usually not. And then the fighters come. BF-109s, FW-190s, attacking from the front, from the side, from below. And you're firing, and they're firing, and it's chaos, noise, smoke, terror. And you're doing this for hours, hours. And then finally you drop your bombs, turn around, head home, and the Germans attack all the way back. More flak, more fighters, and you're counting the minutes, counting the miles, until you cross the coast, until you're over the channel, until you land. And when you land, you climb out. You're shaking. Adrenaline, fear, exhaustion. You look at your aircraft. It's full of holes, hundreds of holes, and you realize you're alive. And you have to do this again, tomorrow, or the next day, 24 more times. That's what 25 missions means. And even with a rotation policy, even with hope, it's brutal. But at least there's an end. At least after 25, you're done. You go home. Now, let me tell you about the Luftwaffe experience, because it's different. You're a German fighter pilot. You wake up, you fly a mission, you land, you refuel, you fly another mission, you land, you eat, you sleep, you wake up, you fly again. There's no count, no number, no end. You fly every day, multiple times per day, until you're shot down, or until the war ends. That's it. And by 1943, 1944, Luftwaffe pilots are flying 2, 3, sometimes 4 missions per day. Every day. For months, for years. And the exhaustion is cumulative. Physical exhaustion. Mental exhaustion. Combat stress. You watch your friends die. Every day. You nearly die. Every day. And there's no break. No rotation. No going home. You just keep flying. Until you can't. Let me tell you about Günter Rall, Luftwaffe ace, 275 confirmed victories, 3rd highest scoring ace of the war, and Rall flew over 800 missions, 800, over 4 years, and he was shot down 8 times, 8, wounded multiple times, broken back, broken bones, concussions, and every time he recovered and went back to flying, because that's what you do. And Rall, he was one of the lucky ones. He survived the war, but most didn't. Most Luftwaffe pilots, they flew until they died, and the attrition rate was staggering. Here's a specific example. Jagdgeschwader 52, Fighter Wing 52, one of the most successful units in the Luftwaffe, based on the Eastern Front, and between 1941 and 1945, JG-52 shot down over 10,000 enemy aircraft. 10,000. The most successful fighter wing in history. But the cost. JG-52 went through over 2,000 pilots. 2,000. Most of them died. Because the Eastern Front was a meat grinder. Soviet aircraft outnumbered German aircraft 10-1. 20-1. More. And German pilots flew multiple missions per day. Every day. against overwhelming odds, and they kept flying until they died. Let me tell you about Hans-Joachim Marseille, the Star of Africa, Luftwaffe ace, 158 victories, all on the North African front. And Marseille, he was brilliant, naturally gifted, could outfly anyone, and he flew mission after mission after mission. And in September 1942, at age 23, his aircraft developed engine trouble over the desert. He tried to bail out, parachute deployed, but he hit the tail. Killed instantly, not shot down, not killed in combat, mechanical failure, and he died. Because he'd been flying so many missions so frequently that the aircraft maintenance suffered. The ground crews couldn't keep up, corners were cut, and Marseille died because of it. And the Luftwaffe lost one of its best pilots to exhaustion, to overuse. Now, let's talk about what happens to pilots who complete 25 missions. American pilots. They go home, and what do? Some retire, leave the service, live their lives, but many, they become instructors. They train the next generation, and they pass on their experience, tactics, lessons, what works, what doesn't, how to survive. And the new pilots benefit. They learn from veterans, real combat experience, not just theory. And this creates a cycle. New pilots are better trained, they survive longer, they pass on their knowledge, the cycle continues, and American pilot quality improves throughout the war. By 1944, 1945, American pilots are, on average, very well trained, very skilled, and they're winning. Germany, by contrast, is losing because their experienced pilots are dead. By 1944, most Luftwaffe veterans are gone. Shot down, killed, and the replacements, they have minimal training, 50 hours of flight time, maybe. That's barely enough to land safely, and they're being sent into combat against American pilots with 300 hours of training, against British pilots with 200 hours. The Germans are outmatched, and they die, quickly, and the few veterans who are left, they're flying constantly, exhausted, burned out, and dying faster. It's a death spiral. Let me tell you about Johannes Steinhoff, Luftwaffe General, fighter ace, 176 victories, and in April 1945, Steinhoff is commander of Jagdverband 44, elite jet fighter unit, flying Me-262s, and on April 18, 1945, Steinhoff is taking off. His jet malfunctions, crashes, explodes, he survives, barely. Horrific burns, face, hands, body. He spends months in the hospital, undergoes dozens of surgeries, and he survives. But he's disfigured, scarred, and after the war, he's asked why he was still flying. In April 1945, the war was clearly lost, Berlin was surrounded, Germany was finished. Why was he still risking his life? And Steinhoff says, quote, because there was no one else. All the young pilots were dead. The training program had collapsed. If the veterans didn't fly, no one would, and we had orders, so we flew. Even though we knew it was pointless, even though we knew we were going to die, we flew, because that's what you do, end quote. That's the difference. American pilots, they knew there was an end, 25 missions. German pilots, they knew there was no end, except death. And that difference, that fundamental difference, it affected everything. Morale, performance, decision-making. American pilots, they could afford to be cautious, avoid unnecessary risks, because they just needed to survive 25. German pilots, they had to be aggressive, take risks, because cautious flying meant losing, and losing meant the war continued, and the war continuing meant more missions, more death. It was a paradox. Take risks to shorten the war, but taking risks meant dying, and dying meant the war went on longer. There was no good answer. Let me tell you about the late war Luftwaffe, 1944, 1945. By this point, the experienced pilots are mostly dead, and the replacements are kids, 18, 19, 20 years old, with minimal training, and they're being sent up against American bomber formations, escorted by P-51 Mustangs. And the American pilots, Many of them are on their second or third tour. Volunteers, experienced, skilled, and the young Luftwaffe pilots, they don't stand a chance. They die within the first 5 missions, usually. Some on their first mission, and the few who survive longer, they're flying constantly, multiple missions per day, against overwhelming odds, and they die, eventually, most of them. Here's a specific example. April 7th, 1945. The Luftwaffe launches Operation Werewolf, a last-ditch effort. Germany scrapes together 183 fighters, mix of jets and piston aircraft, and sends them against American bomber formations. 183 fighters against 800 bombers and 500 escort fighters. The Germans are outnumbered 7-1. And most of the German pilots are inexperienced. First, second, third mission, they attack, and the Americans annihilate them. Of the 183 German fighters, 133 are shot down, 133, in one day, and most of the pilots are killed, 77 pilots dead. And for what? The Germans shot down maybe 12 American bombers. 12. It wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. And it happened because Germany had no choice. They had no experienced pilots, no rotation system, no way to preserve their best people. So they sent everyone, and everyone died. Now, let me tell you about the human cost, because numbers are numbers, but behind every number is a person, a life. Let me tell you about Paul, not his real name. He was a Luftwaffe pilot, 20 years old, from Stuttgart, and he flew his first combat mission in January 1945, over Berlin, against American bombers. He was terrified, had 50 hours of training, barely knew how to fly his aircraft, and he's going up against experienced American pilots. He survives his first mission, doesn't shoot down anything, just survives. His second mission, 3 days later, his wingman is killed, shot down by a P-51. Paul survives again. His third mission, he's hit. 50 caliber rounds through his wing. He crash lands, survives, wounded, spends 2 weeks recovering, returns to duty, flies his fourth mission, March 1945, and he doesn't come back, shot down over Magdeburg by a P-47. His body is never recovered. He's 20 years old, 4 missions, dead, and there's no one to mourn him. His parents are in Stuttgart, being bombed. His squadron mates are dead too, most of them, and Paul is just a statistic, one of 85,000. Compare that to James, American pilot, B-17 Bombardier. He flies his first mission in September 1943, over France, anti-aircraft fire. Scary. But he survives. He flies his second mission, his third, his 10th, and with each mission, he gets better, more confident, learns the tricks, how to spot flak before it hits, how to watch for fighters, how to work with the crew, and he makes it to 25, April 1944, his 25th mission, over Germany. Tough mission, heavy flak, but he survives, and he goes home, back to the States, back to his wife, his daughter. He trains new bombardiers, passes on his knowledge, and when the war ends, he goes back to civilian life, becomes a teacher, lives until 1998, age 76, dies of a heart attack, surrounded by family, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. He lived a full life, because America valued him, rotated him, let him go home after 25. That's the difference. Paul and James, same war, same time, different systems. Paul flies 4 missions and dies at 20. James flies 25 missions and lives to 76. And it's not because James was luckier or more skilled. It's because America had a system that preserved him, and Germany had a system that expended Paul. Now, let's talk about the strategic implications, because this isn't just about individual lives, it's about winning the war. Germany's policy of flying pilots until death, it seems logical. In the short term, you maximize the use of experienced pilots. You keep them in combat, They keep shooting down enemy aircraft, but in the long term, it's disastrous because experienced pilots die, and when they die, their knowledge dies with them. They can't train replacements, can't pass on tactics, and the quality of your pilot force declines steadily until you're sending kids with 50 hours of training into combat, and they die immediately, and you lose. America's rotation policy, it seems wasteful. In the short term, you're pulling experienced pilots out of combat, sending them home, but in the long term, it's brilliant because those pilots train the next generation, and the next generation is better, more skilled, and they win. Here's the math. Germany, in 1944, has maybe 5,000 experienced pilots with 100 or more missions. But by the end of 1944, most of them are dead because they kept flying. And Germany has maybe 20,000 new pilots with minimal training, and they're losing. America, in 1944, has maybe 10,000 experienced pilots, many of them on their second or third tour, volunteers, and they have maybe 30,000 new pilots, well-trained, because the experienced pilots trained them, and America is winning. The difference is the system. Germany expends experience. America preserves it, and that's why America wins the air war. Let me tell you about one more thing. Psychological impact. Because flying until death, it destroys morale. Pilots know they're going to die. It's not if, it's when. And that knowledge, it's crushing. Some pilots, they stop caring. They take reckless risks, might as well go out in a blaze of glory. Some, they become cautious, too cautious. Avoid combat, try to survive, and they get shot down anyway. Because cautiousness in combat is deadly. And some, they just break, mentally. Combat fatigue, shell shock, PTSD. But Germany doesn't have time for that. You break, you're replaced, or you fly anyway, and you die. America, by contrast, the rotation policy, it gives hope. You can survive. You will survive. Just 25. And that hope, it keeps pilots focused, disciplined. They fight to survive, not just for today, but for all 25. And they perform better, and they survive. Here's the final irony. Germany's policy of flying pilots until death was supposed to maximize combat effectiveness, use every pilot to the fullest, but it had the opposite effect. It destroyed effectiveness because exhausted, traumatized, hopeless pilots don't perform well. They make mistakes, they die faster, and they don't pass on their knowledge. America's policy of rotating pilots after 25 missions, it seemed like it would reduce combat effectiveness. You're pulling experienced pilots out. But it had the opposite effect. It increased effectiveness. Because rested, trained, hopeful pilots perform better. They survive longer, and they train others. And the cycle continues. By the end of the war, the difference is stark. The 8th Air Force, by May 1945, is the most powerful air force in the world. Thousands of bombers, thousands of fighters, experienced crews, high morale, complete air superiority. The Luftwaffe, by May 1945, is destroyed. A few aircraft left, barely any fuel, inexperienced pilots, no morale, no hope. And it's not because German pilots were less skilled or less brave. It's because Germany's system destroyed them, flew them until death, and didn't preserve their experience. Let me bring this back to where we started. Heinrich Müller, German pilot, 237 missions, exhausted, traumatized, flying because he has no choice, dies on mission 300, age 23. Robert Johnson, American pilot, 25 missions, hopeful, disciplined, flying because he volunteered, goes home after 25, lives to 83. 2 pilots, 2 systems, 2 outcomes. And the lesson isn't about individual bravery. Both were brave. The lesson is about systems, about how you treat your people. Do you value them, preserve them, rotate them, let them rest, let them go home? Or do you expend them, fly them until death, discard them when they're used up. That choice, that fundamental choice, determines not just individual fates, but the outcome of wars. Germany chose expendability, and 85% of their pilots died. America chose preservation, and 77% of their pilots survived. That's the difference. That's the story. German pilots flew until death. American pilots rotated home after 25 missions. And that difference, that simple policy difference, determined who won the air war, and ultimately who won the war.